Bienvenidos. Welcome, everyone. On behalf of the faculty, staff, students, the research assistants of the Institute of Caribbean Studies, we welcome you to the 8th Gordon K. and Sybil Farrer Lewis Lecture. Welcome to the representatives of the academic management, Dr. David Perez Jimenez from the Chancellor's Office, Dr. Milagros Mendez, Dean of the College of Social Sciences, our distinguished speaker, Professor Emerita Rhoda Reddock, our commentator, Dr. Paul Latortu, former ICS Director, Dr. Lowell Fitt, and a special welcome to the Lewis and Farrell Lewis family. Bienvenidos a casa. Welcome home. Over the last decade, the ICS and the Lewis family have joined forces to bring you this event that celebrates the intellectual and institutional legacy of Gordon K. Lewis, Professor of Social Sciences and former Director of ICS, and Sybil Farrer Lewis, former editor of the journal Caribbean Studies. With it, we honor two pillars of the field of Caribbean Studies, but also fulfill our responsibility for the dissemination of knowledge and the internationalization of our Rio Piedras campus of the University of Puerto Rico. This event is part of our Caribbean Conference cycle, which we have been organizing consistently for more than 15 years and are now in its 34th semester. For those of you interested, the Caribbean conferences are available in the Internet Archive and the UPR Institutional Repository all the 15 years. The Lewis conferences are available in these places, but also in in the Institute's website, where they have been have a devoted section that you can see to the extreme right, if you're looking from the front. The Lewis Conference have been possible thanks to donations from the Lewis Farrell family, from family members, friends, local and international colleagues. If you wish to do a donation, big or small, no matter the size, do access the Special Projects section of the Chancellor's Office and look for Special Project 8 there at the bottom for Caribbean Studies. For those of you interested, we also fulfill our role in the dissemination of knowledge through the publication of Caribbean Studies, a peer-reviewed journal and the only one in our campus available in the prestigious databases JSTOR and Project Muse. We have some in exhibit in the entrance, in the reception, and the latest issues for 2022 and 2023 will be available, are available on the sites and will be out of press soon. It is notable that Sybil was a pioneer woman in editing this journal, and that the three latest issues have been edited by two women, Dr. Melody Fonseca and Dr. Jessica Adams. Those of you that want to know more about our activities and publications, please follow us in our social networks. These are the forthcoming out-of-press journals. Anyone that wants can follow us on Facebook and X, formerly Twitter. And you can also follow the Facebook page of the Social Science and Caribbean Archive, which holds the Lewis Library, the Gordon K. Lewis and Sybil Farrer Lewis Library. This event, as well as our Caribbean Conference, are recorded on our YouTube channel. We welcome our international audience online by the Center for Educational and Technological Resources, and we are very thankful for their assistance and their dedication. In consideration of the recording, please, at this moment, turn off your phones or put them in silent, and please try not to obstruct the camera. In a very personal note, I want to thank the team of students that support me in this effort. Vivian Iglesias, helping with the administrative efforts. Ovidio Torres, who is always an invaluable resource, and particularly the research assistants who have been key in developing this event. Without further ado, I want to welcome for a salute Dr. David Perez Jimenez from the Chancellor's Office.
Good afternoon. Buenas tardes. Before I read a brief message that I have for this afternoon, I want to apologize for the issue with the air condition I am also a director of the Institute for Psychological Research, which is the place where you are right now. And everything was working fine until, I think, yesterday. I don't know at what time, but today I just got notice at 12 noon that there was an issue with the air condition, so we didn't have time to. So I apologize for that, and we are expecting some employers of the university will be coming to see if they can fix the issue before this conference is over. Again, good afternoon. My name is David Perez Jimenez, a researcher at the College of Social Sciences. I'm currently serving as executive assistant to the chancellors of the University of Puerto Rico, Rio Piedras Campus, Dr. Angélica Varela Yabona. I apologize for the absence of the chancellor, who is currently out of the country on official business. By the way, during this time, we are talking, she's on a plane coming back to Puerto Rico. I extend special greetings to our guest lecturer, Dr. Rhoda Reddock, Professor Emeritus at the University of West Indies, San Agustin, Trinidad Tobago, to Dr. Paula Tortu, retired professor from the School of Business Administration of our campus, to Dr. Milagros Mendez, Dean at our College of Social Sciences, and Dr. Jorge Giovanetti, professor in our College of Social Sciences. Hosted by the Institute of Caribbean Studies of the Rio Piedras campus, we are honored to present the 8th edition of the Gordon and Sybil Lewis Conference titled, Welcome to Paradise, Neoliberalism, Violence, and the Social and Gender Crisis in the Caribbean, delivered by Dr. Reddock. The analysis of such important and current issues within our university environment is highly relevant, especially when we view from the perspective of scholars specializing in Caribbean origins. They can provide us with insights drawn from their experience, supported by the research work and solid academic backgrounds, and as demonstrated by Dr. Reddock and Dr. Latortu. Since 2014, the Institute of Caribbean Studies has commemorated the legacies and contribution of Dr. Gordon Lewis and Sybil Lewis to the advancements of studies about this region by organizing annual conferences in their honor. This initiative was accompanied by the establishment of the Lewis Memorial Fund, initially supported by contribution from the Lewis family, as well as donation from more than 50 colleagues and friends. This fund has allowed the Institute of Caribbean Studies to organize the previous 7 Lewis Memorial Conferences from 2014 to 2023, and has supported the ongoing academic and intellectual progress of Caribbean studies at the Rio Piedras campus of the UPR system. The current edition of the conference is no exception, as it is accompanied by a fundraising campaign aimed at sustaining the endeavors of the organizing entity. On behalf of the Chancellor, Varela Yabona, all the students who have benefited from the Lewis Memorial Fund, and the entire university community, we thank Dr. Gordon and Sybil Lewis Foundation and the Institute of Caribbean Studies for the invaluable contribution to education about our Caribbean environment. Thank you.
I want to invite Dean Milagros Mendez from the College of Social Sciences.
Bienvenidos todos, estudiantes, personal docente y no docente, otros invitados y especialmente a la familia de Gordon y Sybil Lewis, quienes he tenido el honor de conocer en el día de hoy y a quienes les doy la más grata bienvenida. A nombre del Instituto de Estudios del Caribe y de la Facultad de Ciencias Sociales, le doy la más cálida bienvenida a la 8ª Gordon and Sybil Lewis Memorial Conference. En el día de hoy, tenemos el honor de recibir a nuestra conferenciante, la profesora emérita en Género, Cambio Social y Desarrollo, la doctora Rhoda Reddock, quien nos visita de la Universidad de West Indies, del campus de San Agustin en Trinidad y Tobago, a quien agradezco que aceptara la invitación para dictar la conferencia de hoy. También agradezco También agradezco al doctor Paul Latortut, profesor retirado de la Facultad de Administración de Empresas de nuestro recinto, por aceptar la invitación para ser el comentarista de la conferencia. Reconocemos su rol como frecuente conferencista sobre los problemas socioeconómicos y de política gerencial en los países del Caribe. Y desde luego, agradecer al doctor Jorge Giovanetti, director interino del Instituto, por la organización de esta actividad y por su compromiso con el Instituto. El decanato de la Facultad de Ciencias Sociales continúa comprometido con la agenda del Instituto, particularmente de cara al siglo XXI, como lo es el tema de la conferencia de hoy titulada Bienvenidos al Paraíso, el neoliberalismo, violencia y la crisis social y de género en el Caribe. Les deseo una tarde muy exitosa. Gracias.
On behalf of the Lewis family, I want to invite Dr. David E. Lewis, the representative of the family, to give a message.
Poner esto aquí. Just wanted to check if I'm missing anybody who joined. Okay. Buenas tardes todos, colegas, amistades, familiares y los que están presentes en el espacio virtual. Me uno a los saludos protocolarios de los colegas aquí de la universidad y los visitantes. En honra de la conferenciante hoy, voy a hacer el switch a inglés y en honor a la tradición multilingüe del instituto. So allow me to switch to English and share these welcome remarks on behalf of the Lewis Farrell family. First and foremost, I'd like to thank God for providing us all with the health and resources to have this 8th Lewis Memorial Lecture, Contra Viento y Marea, as things happen and occur, as we say in Boricua. But in a great team effort between the Institute, all the university entities, colleagues, friends, and the family. My thanks to my wife, Maritza, who is here with me as usual, and our children, Linda and Danilo, in the virtual audience. It is their support that allows me from time to time to leave my day job and engage in these wonderful colaboración universitaria all these years. My siblings, Kathy, Diana, and Jonathan, our many in-laws, nieces, nephews, and cousins with us today virtually from Puerto Rico, the USA, Trinidad, Barbados, England, and Wales. Thank you all for the continued love and support in this endeavor in memory of the lives and academic work of Gordon and Sybil. A very special thanks for joining us today live, my elder cousin from the Farrell Applewhite clan of Carenage, Trinidad, now based in New Jersey, Clara Applewhite Mitchell, her husband Curtis Mitchell, and our junior cousins, Janelle Mitchell and Elise Mitchell. Welcome to your first family visit to Puerto Rico, and we hope you enjoy it, not just in this event, but everything else that we have to offer here. Today is another Lewis Farrell Memorial Lecture with, as I always call, some key important firsts, which I point out. This is our first Trini woman speaker. It is also our first University of the West Indies St. Augustine Trinidad and Tobago speaker, and our first English-speaking Caribbeanist from what we call the after Lewis generation of Caribbeanists, the younger crowd, senior, but not the old generation of the 50s and 60s. And today, by serendipity, as we juggle dates for the 2024 lecture, happens to be the 22nd anniversary of our mother's death. And as in the Caribbean, we always celebrate the passing of loved ones as a new stage of life, something that hurts and saddens, but you also celebrate in love. We have a special treat to add to the usual protocol of the lectures, and the family has prepared a short audiovisual treat on Sybil, which we are certain you will enjoy. Credits are due not to me. I'm not very tech savvy, although I use the means, but the special producer team of my sister Diana Lewis in North Carolina, her son, my nephew Gordon, and our niece Sybil for the great creative and technical work. Let me thank the Institute and the university authorities for graciously agreeing to that special addition to the usual proceedings, and especially Professor Lowell Fiet, who will provide an in memoriam of Sybil. Gracias a todos. So Professor Emerita Reddock, Rhoda, friend and colleague of various Lewises over the years, today you're in a special and unique spot to continue to honor and cherish your Caribbean regionalist DNA and vocation. I say Rhoda because as opposed to all the prior speakers who were my Caribbeanist mentors, Rhoda is really my Caribbean studies contemporary. We've been privileged to have been involved in many diverse Caribbean studies engagements across the decades since the mid-1980s, I dare say, and the rise of gender studies at the University of the West Indies and the region, the growth of feminist and gender-focused research and policy in academia and in civil society, and the push for DEI well before it was vogue or had a social media acronym. And of course, in many conferences of our cherished Caribbean Studies Association. But in addition, and historically of greater significance for our endeavor today, is that coming from the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine, Rhoda follows a great tradition of Lewis Farrell colleagues and camaraderie with special link, not just because of Sybil's nationality and Gordon's special linkages to leaders like Eric Williams, William Dimas, and others from Trinidad and Tobago, but also because at the University of the West Indies St. Augustine campus, they nurtured and were nurtured by colleagues and friends who engendered and supported over decades the Caribbean studies cause. Many are still with us today, while others we have lost over the years. Lloyd Best, Lloyd Brathwaite, James Millett, Selwyn Ryan, Max Richards, Bridget Brereton, Leslie Manigat, Basil Ince, Anthony Mengo, Anthony Bryan, Henry Gill, Compton Bourne, Anthony Gonzalez, Anton Alahar, Patricia Mohammed, Udine Barreto, and many more, which for lack of time and moment, I cannot continue listing. Many of us who are from the University of the West Indies, Mona, Jamaica DNA, boast that it was at that campus in Jamaica that the indigenous West Indian historiography of the 1940s and 50s was born, that the radical thought of the New World Group was launched, that the intellectual roots of the anti-colonial and independence ideologies and practice were bred and developed, and that it was there where the spirit and body of West Indian nationhood grew. But it was really in Trinidad and with the University of the West Indies St. Augustine as the lead intellectual force that the spirit and body of regional integration was born and nurtured and developed, with Eric Williams and many others leading the cause and fighting and failing for federation. Today, Trinidad is still the front center of the CARICOM integration fight, contra viento y marea again, and Rhoda's presence with us today is a real-life connection to that historical link to the Lewis and Farrell Caribbean Studies cause. A word of caution, as I always provide with full disclosure about our memorial lecture speakers. Colleagues, friends, today you will be challenged and pressed by Rhoda's presentation, as should be the case with the Lewis Farrell Memorial Lecture. We are not here to agree or to cheerlead or chastise, but more so to engage in the spirit of intellectual and policy debate. Her lecture will be rich in thought, stimulating in ideas, and above all, engaging and challenging to all in her commitment and cause with Caribbean studies. Today, she will add the Instituto de Estudios del Caribe to that great trajectory. Last but not least, as Jorge mentioned, I'd like to thank all the donors who have collaborated over the years and this year with the fundraising effort for the Lewis Farrell Memorial Lecture and whose support makes this venture possible. You can still donate online or even directly to the Institute, and Jorge can provide you with that information. Again, muchas gracias and enjoy.
Thanks, David. I want to invite Dr. Lowenfeld, who kindly agreed to read Semblanza for Sybil.
Muy bien. Primero, tengo que decir que cuando yo fui director del instituto, tuve el privilegio en 2017 de organizar una de las conferencias de Gordon and Sybil. Y era el momento máximo, mejor de mi tiempo en el instituto. Y por eso también quiero agradecer especialmente a la familia Lewis por invitarme a poder participar de esta forma, por leer la semblanza de Sybil. Hay muchas memorias. A mí me gustaría poder comentar sobre mis memorias y mi relación con Sybil y Gordon, pero no voy a hacerlo. Voy a seguir como un buen actor mi papel aquí y de veras leer que la semblanza con solamente un par de ediciones menores, pero nada para cortar de lo que yo tengo frente a mí. Okay? Sybil Farrell Lewis, January 31, 1925, April 11, 2002. Sybil Farrell Lewis was born in Port of Spain, Trinidad and Tobago, where she received her primary and secondary education. In 1950, under the sponsorship of the U.S. Point Four Scholarship, she came to study at the University of Puerto Rico and to earn a BA degree in natural sciences chemistry, the first woman to graduate with a chemistry degree from the University of Puerto Rico. Her coming to Puerto Rico to study was at the instigation of the great Caribbean historian Eric Williams, then Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago and the leader of the People's National Movement. As the principal leader of the developing regional integration movement, Williams saw this as an opportunity for a young disciple to advance at the regional level. In the early 1950s in Puerto Rico, Sybil met and mingled with the regional and international intelligentsia that was gathering and experiencing the novelty of the Puerto Rican model of development, almost all within the institutional realm of the University of Puerto Rico. University of Puerto Rico's golden era under the leadership of Don Jaime Benitez. It was then that she met Gordon K. Lewis, a recent arrival to the university from Harvard, who was a young associate professor in political science in the College of Social Sciences and engaged in the debate and development of the new Commonwealth Constitution. After graduation in 1954, Sybil returned to Trinidad and Tobago and worked as an assistant chemist in the colonial government. In 1955, Sybil married Gordon, and they lived briefly in Trinidad while arrangements were being made for their return to Puerto Rico. In 1956, they did return to Puerto Rico, where they settled, built their home and family together in Trujillo Alto, raising their 5 children, Jacqueline, David, Diana, Catherine, and Gordon Jonathan. From the 1950s onward, Gordon and Sybil nurtured their interest in and love of Caribbean society and life, a love that they embedded in their family and shared with many friends and colleagues worldwide. Gordon became the leading scholar and intellectual on Caribbean reality, and Sybil advanced her own career at the University of Puerto Rico. Their home in Trujillo Alto became the obligatory visiting spot and hosting station for fellow Caribbeanists visiting from the region, North America, Europe, South America, literally the 4 corners of the world. Okay. Regulars were the creme de la creme of Caribbean intellectual and political life. Lloyd Best, George Lamming, Leslie Montagut, Vaughn Lewis, Errol Barrow, Ricky Singh, Connie Sutton, Merle Hodge, Pat Bishop, Lambros Comitas, Dick and Emmy Morris, Jean and Louise Crusoe, Clovis Beauregard, and many more. One would be hard-pressed to identify any Caribbean academic or thinker of this era who did not pass through Sybil and Gordon's Caribbean rite of passage in Trujillo Alto, which included fetes, good music, food, and of course, intellectual and political debate. Sybil worked as a research assistant at the university's Instituto de Cooperativismo until 1958. During a short academic leave in London from 1960 to 1961, she took courses in social sciences and philosophy in the London School of Economics. Back in Puerto Rico in 1963, she worked for a few months on the editing and publishing of the journal Caribbean Studies, published by the recently created Institute of Caribbean Studies. The experience was a turning point in her career, and she remained at the Institute until her retirement in 1988. In 1966, she became the managing editor of Caribbean Studies, which became the principal journal of the region. In 1969 to 1971, again on leave in London, she earned a postgraduate diploma at the London School of Economics, advancing her expertise in the field of publications. As managing editor of Caribbean Studies, she oversaw the publication of many articles, books, and theses on the Caribbean, including many from renowned Puerto Rican scholars like Manuel Maldonado Denis, Luis Nieves Falcón, Andrés Ramos Mate, Benjamín Nistal, Juan Rodríguez Cruz, y Ángel Quintero Rivera, among others. Likewise, Caribbeans from all over were published in the journal during her tenure, including Sidney W. Mintz, M.G. Smith, Mervyn Allain, Anthony B. Manjot, Richard Price, Gordon Roller, Jean Crusoe, and Harry Houtink, to name just a few. Okay. In addition to Caribbean Studies, she edited and co-edited many publications and books on the region, organized book exhibits and academic events on the Caribbean, and represented the Institute of Caribbean Studies at many regional and international book fairs. One such publication was her co-edited volume with Thomas G. Matthews, Caribbean Integration, papers on social, political, and economic integration from, of course, the Institute of Caribbean Studies, University of Puerto Rico, 1967. During her over 40 years of involvement in Caribbean Studies, Sybil participated in many events around the region and the world, and always found time for the annual conferences of the Caribbean Studies Association. Her involvement with CSA reached its high point in the May 1981 conference in St. Thomas, U.S. Virgin Islands, where Gordon was awarded the Caribbean Review Award. Later, in 1984, Gordon was to receive an honorary doctorate from the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine Campus, Trinidad and Tobago, a recognition of Sybil's country to his contribution to Caribbean studies. All who knew her were well aware that she was the inspiration and emotional foundation of all activities in which she engaged. Her spirit was free and dynamic, her mind was sharp and persevering, and her grace was majestic and proud. That ends the semblanza. I'm going to put just one nota al calce. I had many the experiences with Sybil, as I did with Gordon, but one in particular will make you understand just how crucial she was. I organized the West Indian Literature Conference on this campus in 1987, the Caribbean literature in its political context. It went exceptionally well, but for personal reasons, I could not host the fete, the final event, the big deal, okay? And very, very graciously, very, very generously, she stepped in, and we all went to the house in Trujillo Alto. Y de veras, that was a fit. Thank you. Okay.
Thanks to Dr. Lowe-Fit for those words. Let's enjoy this video. Now, before our main speaker and the commentators, it is my duty to introduce both our 8th Gordon and Civil Lewis lecturer and our commentator. Professor Rhoda Reddock is Emerita Professor of Gender, Social and Development and former Deputy Campus Principal of the University of West Indies San Agustin campus. She studied at the University of the West Indies, then earned a Master's of Development Studies at the Institute of Social Studies at The Hague, the Netherlands, and a PhD from the University of Amsterdam. For many years, she served as the head of the Center for Gender and Development Studies. She's also a former lecturer in sociology at UWI St. Augustine, an associate lecturer in the Women and Development Program at the Institute of Social Studies in The Hague. An activist in the Caribbean Women's Movement, she was also a founding member and first chair of the Caribbean Association for Feminist Research and Action, CAFRA. She has been a former president of Research Committee 32, Women and Society of the International Sociological Association. This organization's initiatives on racism, nationalism, indigeneity, and ethnicity, and also a member of ISA's Executive Committee. She has also served on the Council of the Caribbean Studies Association, where we met, I think. And her numerous publications include many works, including Women, Labor, and Politics in Trinidad and Tobago, which was named Choice Outstanding Academic Book for 1995, Plantation Woman, International Experiences, co-edited with Shovita Jain, Caribbean Sociology, Introductory Readings, co-edited with Christine Barrow, the edited collection Integrating Caribbean Masculinities, published in 2004 and winner of the Best-Selling Textbook Award of 2007. Most recently, she co-edited the volume Entrangled Inequalities, Decolonial Perspectives in Europe and the Caribbean, with Encarnacion Gutierrez Rodriguez. She has also published over 80 peer-reviewed articles and book chapters. Professor Reddock's many accomplishments includes the UWI Vice Chancellor's Award for All-Round Excellence in Teaching and Administration Research and Public Service, and the 7th CARICOM Triennial Award for Women at the Heads of Government Meetings of the Caribbean Community in Guyana. In 2004, Professor Reddock was the recipient of a distinguished Fulbright New Century Scholars Award, and in 2008, she received an International Woman of Courage Award. She has been a visiting professor in the African Gender Institute at the University of Cape Town in South Africa, and also at the Justus Liebig University in Gießen, Germany. Professor Reddock is currently an elected expert serving her second term on the UN Committee for the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women. She's a board member of the Coalition Against Domestic Violence and Data Projects, and continues to be an active in local movements for women's rights and social justice. We welcome Professor Reddock. Our commentator, Dr. Paul, we can have applause later for both of them. Dr. Paul Latortu holds a PhD in economics and an MBA in finance and marketing. After teaching many years in the UPR, he took over the position of Dean of the College of Business Administration in 2004. For a decade, and with great leadership, he fulfilled successfully his mission of achieving the accreditation of the school by the AACSB, the most important accreditation for business schools in the world. After that, he has outsourced his knowledge, wisdom, and skills to his native land of Haiti, assisting the University of Notre Dame in Haiti in the creation of an MA in Business Administration, now in its 7th cohort with a joint degree with the Inter-American University of Puerto Rico. In the 1990s, from the Prime Minister's office in Haiti, Dr. Latortu directed a program of infrastructure renovation financed by the International Development Bank and the World Bank. From 1997 to 1999, this program employed more than 70,000 people working in damaged infrastructure. This experience has taught him the high cost and consequences when governments fail in their maintenance plans. Dr. Latortu has written and published various articles on the socioeconomic development of Haiti, Puerto Rico, and the Caribbean, and also earlier on migration issues. We welcome now Professor Reddock, and thanks for your presence here.
Thank you very much, Jorge, and special thanks for all your hard work in making this event actually happen. I'd also like to acknowledge Dr. David Perez Jimenez, Office of the Chancellor, UPR, Dr. Milagros Mendez, Dean of the College of Social Sciences, Dr. David Lewis and members of the Lewis and Farrell families, Dr. Lowell Fiat, professor and former IEC director at UPR, my commentator, Dr. Paul Latter, too, professor, University of Puerto Rico, staff and students of the Institute of Puerto Rican Studies and the University of Puerto Rico, and members of the Caribbean Studies Association who may be present, and colleagues, Caribbeanists, friends, all. I wanted to especially thank David Lewis for such a warm welcome to the Lewis family, Lewis Farrell Memorial Lecture community, and to the UPR, where I have engaged on so many occasions over the years. When I was approached about 1 year ago to present this lecture, I considered it an honor and privilege that I couldn't refuse. Puerto Rico is one of my favorite places in the whole world, so that I could not give up an opportunity or an excuse to be back here after so many years. For me to recount all the endearing memories that I have of Puerto Rico would require another lecture. But a few include at least 2 or 3 conferences of the Caribbean Studies Association, the historic Institute of Development Studies UK and CEREP, don't know if you remember that, Center for the Study of Puerto Rican Reality, workshop on women and social production in the Caribbean, organized by Marcia Rivera and Katie Young in 1980, which was a pivotal event in the history of second wave Caribbean feminism. Attending meetings of the Caribbean Network of Studies of Studies of Masculinity, founded by the late Inika Cunningham and Rafael Ramirez, and later with Victor Garcia Toro, among many others. And also the so many other colleagues with whom I've collaborated. And of course, I must mention Angel Chuco Quintero, who's here with us this afternoon, but also Alice Colon. And please forgive all my other amigos Puerto Ricanos that I have missed. But most of all, I've always been impressed with your commitment to being Caribbean, even though this has been fraught with many challenges over the last 4 decades. But possibly my most memorable event was my first visit to Puerto Rico, just after completing my undergraduate degree at the UWI Mona campus in Jamaica. My host took me on a tour of the UPR, and in the library, I suddenly got sight of this flash of color in the otherwise calm and studious space. Who is that, I asked of my host, Professor John Figueroa. That, he said, is Sybil Lewis, and actually she is from Trinidad. I would later learn that while Sybil was an excellent editor, a most critical profession for any academic endeavor, and a committed Caribbeanist, she had a sense of style which many of us admired, but could definitely not reproduce, no matter how hard we tried. This was the start of a wonderful relationship, which would be reignited at CSA conferences, my visits to Puerto Rico, which were incomplete without a visit to Sybil at the ICS, and lunch on or off campus. Sybil was a true Trini who continued her engagement with TNT developments. It was a joy to hear her Trini accent when she was having a good Trini discussion or a debate with much laughter and piquant. But she was also a proud Puerto Ricana who introduced me to Asapao at one of those historic events to which you referred to earlier at Gordon and Sybil's home. She was proud to introduce me to this dish that she prepared and which she claimed as strongly as she did Trinidad and Tobago's pilau. She was also a serious defender of her children and woe betide anyone who didn't treat them the way she thought they should. Of course, I had already heard of Gordon. Who hadn't? As students of Caribbean social sciences, we could not help but know his name and read Growth of the Modern West Indies and Main Currents in Caribbean Thought. But it was, of course, a very different time, a time quite different from this one. Today, I am ashamed to say that in the English-speaking Caribbean, the name of Gordon K. Lewis is probably not very well known. even by contemporary historians and social sciences of the Anglophone region, especially among younger academics. So I really congratulate you all on these efforts to keep their work and life alive. Although, unfortunately, at this time, critical and pan-Caribbean social thought is so greatly needed. The reasons behind this are among those that I will reflect on today in my presentation. Okay, now, there are over 300 plus US cable stations beamed throughout the region. I don't know how many you will get here. But, of course, one of my favorites is Home and Garden TV. You know, there are these island and beach programs, Caribbean Life, Beachfront Bargain Hunt, Bahamas Life, Island Life, and the prospective homeowners, you know, as they walk around our beautiful spaces, say, what beautiful views, the beautiful water and beaches, sailing, water sports, and they always want a home right on the beach. I always say they don't know about hurricanes. And of course, the catchphrase for one of these shows is, find your home in paradise. Now, some of us actually live in paradise. And what is not shown in these television programs are the many social and economic challenges, increasing violence and social inequalities affecting many of our countries. And with the exception of the first peoples who originally inhabited the region, the majority of ancestors were brought here, you know, as enslaved or indentured laborers, as refugees and migrants. In addition, there were others whose presence here was primarily commercial and extractive. So what is life like for those of us who actually live in paradise? In my presentation this afternoon, I highlight the social and gender impact of neoliberal global economic restructuring on the lives of Caribbean peoples and the social inequalities and violence and criminal justice response that has resulted. I also trace the shift in social policy in the former British colonies and its demise to varying degrees with the global shift to economic neoliberalism and the reduction in state social responsibility for citizens and the vulnerable. Now, the Caribbean has experienced the most dramatic increase in homicidal violence in recent years, largely because of intense competition between gangs over drug markets. In 2022, the number of homicides in the Turks and Caicos Islands, a transit point between the Bahamas, Colombia, and Venezuela, climbed to 28 in October 2022, compared with 13 during the whole of 2021. Turks and Caicos is quite small. In Jamaica, the homicide rate reached 53.3 per 100,000 in 2022, with about 70% of the homicides being connected to organized criminal groups or gangs in 2021. St. Lucia recorded of 36.7 per 100,000 in 2022, a slight increase from the previous year, while St. Vincent and the Grenadines reported a homicide rate of 40.4 per 100,000. The rate in Trinidad and Tobago rose to 39.5% per 100,000 in 2022, an increase of more than 30% from the previous year. So this is a galloping movement, largely due to the splintering of large gangs into even smaller violent factions. The rate reached 31.2 per 100,000 in Bahamas in 2022, and in Haiti, it surged to 18 per 100,000. This is interesting because Haiti's gang violence was not as high, the rate, as in some other parts of the region, but that was an increase of more than 35% from 2021, due in part to deepening tensions associated with gang violence. Now, I put out those figures, and we need to note, in contrast, that while intentional homicide rates have declined in other parts of the world, they are rising in Latin America and the Caribbean region, especially Central America, and the most victims are adolescent males and young adults. In the 1990s already, we were witnessing the rise of drugs, gangs, and gun violence. Buvanik and Shifter observed in 1990, Latin American and Caribbean homicides rates was more than twice that of the world average. This was second to sub-Saharan Africa, which was close to double this with 40.1. But no other region in the world had a homicide rate, in other words, except for sub-Saharan Africa and the Caribbean. No other region in the world had a homicide rate that was more than 9 per 100,000. So you have to look at that in relation to our rates of 30 and 40 and 50 per 100,000. But the 1990s was also the period of the intensification of the neoliberalist global restructuring, and also the increase in weapon flows into the region as it became a key drug transshipment point. And this led to a meteoric rise in male-led gang violence in marginalized neighborhoods. I must apologize that this is in English and not in Spanish. Now, this new phase of liberalism was marked by the introduction of deregulation, liberalization, and privatization, terms that you will hear more about, and is usually linked to the explicit attacks on trade unions by Thatcher in 1979, then by Reagan in 1980, in their efforts, well, not theirs, but the general efforts to counter declining rates of profit and to reestablish control over labor. Philosophically, this new paradigm reestablished the almost unfettered right of the individual to pursue personal profit and accumulate wealth without concern for social distribution. These strategies, implemented initially through the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank structural adjustment programs, were first instituted in debt-strapped countries of Latin America and the Caribbean. And two of the very first were Chile and Jamaica in the late 1970s. Now, these policies soon became encapsulated under a term known as the Washington Consensus. And according to John Williamson, who first coined the term, these were its basic components: what they call fiscal discipline, reordering public expenditure priorities, tax reform, liberalizing interest rates, a competitive exchange rate, trade liberalization, liberalization of inward foreign direct investment, privatization, deregulation, focus on easing barriers to entry and exit, and property rights. Now, these were also combined with privatization and reduction of the public sector, dismantling of the post-World War II welfare-oriented and economic development strategies, liberalization of global markets, what in a new phase of economic globalization, removing protection from local agriculture and manufacturing, and allowing for the free flow of goods and services. We also saw the shift from the old GATT, the General Agreement in Tariffs and Trade, to the new General Agreement on Trades and Services, which removed government's possibility, those who have signed, to give preferential treatment to local industry or institutions, even educational institutions. And also all of this happened at a time with the emergence of new information and communication technologies, which contributed in their own way. Now, the withdrawal of the state from social reproduction, social protection, and the care economy was disparagingly referred to by some as the nanny state. In other words, the role of the state to protect and care for its citizens was critiqued as being overprotective, interfering, and encouraging dependency. This was part of a wider policy of shifting the locale of activity away from the state to the private sector. And what is interesting is that by doing this, the state's subsequent inability to respond to the needs of its citizens resulted in increased mistrust of the state and the public sector. And there was a recent study done by, I think it's the IDB in the region, and they show the extreme distrust of the state because the same state now cannot respond to the demands and the needs of the citizens. So we saw, therefore, the destruction of local manufacturing and a shift from import substitution, dismantling of the local industrial support infrastructure, destruction of the main agro-based production systems, especially in the OECS countries. This is the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, with the loss of the preferential market for agro-based products in the EU. So sugar, our sugar industry closed down, bananas, that more or less died, nutmeg. So most of the bananas in our region are now imported, as is sugar, except for Guyana, etc. And in many countries, local fruit were replaced. I mean, it's very hard to find local fruit in supermarkets or even markets in many parts of the region. There was, of course, a move away from secure wage employment with social security benefits and job security, a shift to short-term insecure contract labor outsourcing with no benefits, no access to social security and pensions, a reduction and precaritization of the state sector. So even within the state, you had short-term contracts. We have short-term contracts, I think as low as 1 month and 3 months, and limits on wage increases, and the focus on small and micro enterprise development as the solution, what is now called individual entrepreneurship as an economic alternative, especially for poor women, but with no social security or other social protection, as we saw during COVID when so many people became homeless and without food in a very short period of time. And of course, with precarious labor, the undermining of the trade unions. But most important for this paper is the shift in social policy. There was a withdrawal from the social support systems introduced in the post-war period, cutbacks in social spending, shifting the wider social care responsibility to women, families, and non-governmental institutions, including religious organizations, now perceived as part of the private sector. And these NGOs often had untrained personnel in precarious contract positions, resulting in an increased distance between the state and those who actually need support. There was a shift from direct intervention by the state in communities, for example, community-based social work, alcohol and addiction prevention, education and treatment, psychosocial services to children. All of this was then shifted to NGOs who would then receive state subventions, but this would also be unstable because those subventions could change from year to year or disappear. Now, in Haiti, in particular, NGOs were particularly important, even though I'm dealing primarily with the British West Indies. Mackenzie Kelly notes that during the 1998 bailout in Haiti, the IMF followed with a freeze of all international funds to the state of Haiti, though donations to NGOs continued to remain high. This ultimately led to NGOs circumventing the measures and providing continual aid. So in other words, the NGOs then took on the major role of social support systems in many countries, and I think in Haiti, and my colleague, Professor Latatu, may want to address this. And what happens is that with the strengthening of these NGOs, they also sometimes created parallel institutions, while the state systems were just almost destroyed to disappear. And now some people can argue that the state was corrupt. That's possible. But I think that there has to be another way to provide structured and organized and professional support services in our region. Now, what I want to point out here is that the impacts were not only in our region, Central, South America, the Caribbean, but in fact, both in the global North and the South, wherever those policies were established, they resulted in increased social inequalities and reduced support for people generally. Guy Standing, sociologist, he coined the word the precariat to refer to a growing number of people across the world living and working precariously, usually in a series of short-term jobs without stable identities or careers, social protection, or protective regulations relevant for their situation. And this could be migrants, but also locals. And I think what is interesting about what he said is that this precariat then it introduces new instabilities in society because they're increasingly frustrated and could be dangerous because they have no voice. And hence they are vulnerable to the siren calls of extreme political parties. And I think we have seen it with the recruitment to ISIS. My own country, Trinidad and Tobago, had the highest per capita recruitment to ISIS. One would not have expected it. But they were committed Muslims, but also they were being paid in US dollars. But also to right-wing armed groups who are able to recruit young men and women from throughout the world and are examples of this. Standen argues for a new kind of society with more people actively involved in civil society and the re-engagement of the precariat. In 2014, I was in Japan, and I saw this. I read a lot of newspapers. I saw this article in the Japanese newspaper, and you may not be able to read it. Oh yeah, it's not too bad. Where it says that over 16% of children in Japan were living below the poverty line in 2012. It also said that that the Ministry of Health, Labor and Welfare attributed the record child poverty levels to declines in incomes in households with children in the economy still experiencing deflation. It also went on to say that over 60% of all people were living in poverty, so-called relative poverty rate. It said the primary cause, a decline in parental income, and he said the government should step up funding for children, include measures for low-cost housing, etc., etc. But it says that among the 34 countries of the OECD, mostly advanced economies, including Japan, the relative child poverty rates average 11.3 to 13.3%, respectively, in 2010. And I'm sorry to put so many words, but I was really intrigued by this. The UN Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty and Human Rights report of the United Kingdom in 2019 stated basically that, you know, the UK is the world's 5th largest economy, and 1/5 of its population, 14 million, live in poverty, and 1.5 million of them experienced destitution in 2017. And policies of austerity introduced in 2010 continue largely unabated despite these tragic social consequences. Close to 30% of children are predicted to be living in poverty. Food banks have proliferated. Homelessness, rough sleeping have increased greatly, etc., etc. What really got me was when they said over here that the social safety net has been badly damaged by drastic cuts to local authorities' budgets, which have eliminated many social services, reduced policing services, closed libraries in record numbers. Now, that one really got me. And I found out later that they use the libraries so people can go to use a computer to apply for government, whatever they can have to get from the government. Shrunk community and youth centers and sold off public spaces and buildings. The bottom line is that much of the glue that has held British society together since the Second World War has been deliberately removed and replaced with a harsh, uncaring ethos. A booming economy, high employment, and a budget surplus have not reversed austerity. But we have been down this road before, certainly those of us in the Caribbean. In the 19th and early 20th century, the colonial policy was one of liberalism. And basically, the position was, according to Wicker, he reminds us, that for the English colonial mercantilists, the economic development of colonies meant the development of colonial natural resources for the exclusive benefit of the people of the metropolitan country, not the welfare of the colonial peoples. So in the 19th century, the colonial authorities placed no responsibility on the people of the colonies, even though this was just decades, not many decades, after enslavement and indentureship in the region. So the policy was that colonies, i.e. resident European planters, government officials, and business people, were to be self-supporting and could only have such services as they could afford through exports and investment. Temporary assistance was available in cases of national emergency. So in 1929, for example, the Colonial Development Welfare Act, despite the ongoing economic depression, it provided £1 million a year for the entire British Empire, Africa, Asia, the Pacific, through loans or grant for expenditure only on economic, i.e. profit-making projects, excluding spending on social services, including health. The colonial government's position was based on a laissez-faire philosophy that prosperity resulted from the least possible government intervention in the domestic economy, from open international relations with little trade discrimination, and from currencies that were fixed in value and readily convertible. And this sounds very familiar to the global economic policies that were being adopted in the late 20th century. Now, the global economic depression, however, soon challenged this thinking. Governments could no longer depend on the free market to guide their economic programs, although they assumed, like today, that the market would eventually correct itself. In our region, the British colonial Caribbean, there were labor disturbances throughout the 1930s, brought about by the existing social degradation, labor exploitation, discrimination, and the recommendations of a commission sent out, the West Indian Royal Commission, or Maine Commission, contributed to the new development and welfare policy that would eventually emerge. Now, what is important is that it was this climate of depression, social degradation, increased inequality, impoverishment, and you must also remember that in between all of that, there was the Spanish flu, a pandemic, also contributing to this situation. And all of this fueled this socio-economic environment, fueled the emergence of fascism and Nazism in Europe and World War II. And for me, this seems very similar to the period we're in at this time. We could probably debate that a little. So these are the disturbances that happened throughout the region, 1934 to 1938, and this is the Trinidad Sunday Guardian talking about the disturbances, but also Hitler flies from country retreat. So all of this is going on at the same time. These labor disturbances, the fascist threat, and eventually the war right after this. So in 1939, this was published in 1939, W. Arthur Lewis, Nobel laureate from St. Lucia, in this small publication, Labor in the West Indies, he reported on the impact of the Depression throughout the British West Indies. He reported on the labor disturbances. He noted the fall of sugar prices in the independent countries of Cuba, Haiti, and the Dominican Republic. And he noted that in the US-controlled Caribbean colonies of Puerto Rico and the US Virgin Islands, the mini New Deal program of Theodore Roosevelt focused on health, education, and social programs, making new colonial social interventions even more imperative for the British colonial Caribbean. So in other words, the US responded earlier to these situations. There are different theories as to why that happened, but nevertheless, it put a certain pressure on the British colonial authorities in terms of what is going to happen in the British colonies in light of all the disturbances, protests, riots that were taking place. Now, meanwhile, in 1935, a second New Deal in Puerto Rico actively shifted federal policy from one of relief to one of reconstruction, focused on the island's specific needs in the wake of the hurricanes and depression. And this, of course, was part of that larger shift that we see moving away from laissez-faire types of economics to one with a little more federal or state intervention. By building the island's first public works, establishing its first public authorities, to construct the Puerto Rican Reconstruction Administration constructed a new public infrastructure with three main goals: increasing life expectancy through concrete interventions in public health, providing more egalitarian public access to safer and more permanent built environment, and limiting the private corporate control of Puerto Rico's natural resources. So then, much later, because the British decided to wait until after World War II, you had the new colonial and development welfare policy for the British colonies, which was also a major shift in social policy, in line with what we see happening. And the new focus was on social equality. In the UK, the new Labour Party government introduced social welfare and economic policies based on Keynesian ideas. And in other parts of Europe, you had the social democratic policies. And of course, in 1948, the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. And this is the act which, for the first time, acknowledged the colonial state's responsibility to ensure the social and economic welfare and development of the people of the colonies. And as in Puerto Rico, there was new infrastructure, public housing for the first time, expanded health services throughout the country with district health services, district health officers, resident district nurses, expanded education, university scholarships, and a lot of our UWI colleagues got their university scholarships. Lloyd Braffett got his, quite a few others at this time, to go and study social work. So actually, the scholarships was for social work, but many of our colleagues, when they arrived to the US, they said, to UK, they said, we want to do sociology instead. Social statistics. At that whole Caribbean demography school, a lot of them began their training through these colonial development and welfare scholarships. In fact, our water and sanitation infrastructure was laid down then in 1960s. And up to now, we have not been able to totally overhaul that water and sanitation structure. We had strengthened agricultural infrastructure, agricultural extension, agricultural research, et cetera, a much different scenario. But now we've come back to the present. the ongoing social and gender crisis in the Anglophone Caribbean. We are experiencing a weaponization of Caribbean societies. Before 2000, fewer than 30% of all homicides were with firearms, and they probably would have been with cutlasses or machetes. And today they're using an average of 70% of homicides in Central America, 61% in the Caribbean. They're used in intimate partner violence, and in 2014, according to UNICEF, it was reported that Trinidad and Tobago was among the 7 countries in Latin America and the Caribbean where homicide is the leading cause of death for boys 10 to 19 years, and one of the 7 countries of the region where advances in child survival, that is children's survival because of better health, are offset by homicide deaths. That's the extent of it. We have a situation of gang warfare and also gang welfare, where gang membership, although often coercive, represents opportunities for community, for young people, young men whose parents were killed, parents in jail, etc., who had no parents, as well as provision of social and economic support. Beverly Mullings used the term gang welfare to describe the situation where gang leaders provide social welfare, such as health, education. In Jamaica, they pay school fees and employment in result for affiliation and membership. It was noted in some urban communities, the gang leaders, or dons as they are called in Jamaica, become leaders of states within states in escalating crises of governability, which are responded to with increased state violence. Now, toys for the boys. Now, the organized criminal gangs, with their large-scale use of arms and strict discipline and ranking systems, could be seen as militarist organizations. And there's a lot of inter-gang conflict and revenge killings. And what I call an escalating arms race between the police and the gangs, because the police complain that the gangs have better weapons, and they call on the state to give them more sophisticated weapons. So you have this arms race taking place between the gangs and the police. So you have increased state expenditure and militarization, but this has not resulted in feelings of security among the population. Now, the primary approach that is proposed to deal with this crime and violence is a criminal justice one, a militaristic response to what is really a social crisis through the war and crime and the escalation of weapons. Amnesty International, in a 2016 report, observed that 3,000 people had been allegedly killed by members of the Jamaican Constabulary Force between 2000 and 2015. So even though there's more security, more police, more security dogs, more security equipment in homes, in businesses, on streets and cameras, there's increased insecurity and fear. And these demands for security decrease this emotional and the physical distance between the rich and the poor, divisions among racialized and ethnicized communities. You have class differentiated facilities, private schools, health facilities, gated housing communities, transport, etc., in an effort to address these issues. Now, these are common pictures we see every day in the newspapers. These are dead bodies with personnel. These are armed police on the street, and these are police lines. And of course, we must see the rise in male youth criminality and violence as part of the youth retreat from formal education. And of course, it's always juxtaposed against demands for women's rights. However, we've noticed that the demands put on young men in this kind of climate in order to express their masculinities, and the risk of violence that young girls, boys, and young men run into on a daily basis, even in schools, in order to prove their masculinity through physical risk and violence to self and others. So we need to transform popular notions of manhood and womanhood and to address more life-affirming forms of masculinities. Now, I think my time is running out, so I just wanted to quickly go through. So with the fall of the various traditional economic activities, what are the new economic activities emerging? Well, of course, tourism. Tourism is the single most important economic activity in the region, and in close to half the countries analyzed, it accounts to 25% of GDP, more than double the world average of 10.4%. In the case of the British Virgin Islands, it contributes 98.5% of GDP. There's also casino gambling, offshore banking, citizenship by investment programs. These are where rich people can buy citizenship, marijuana production and trade, legal and illegal, human trafficking, and of course narco-trafficking. That's kind of part of what our alternative economy has become. Of course, sex work is very important in our tourism, and in fact, Kamala Kampadu notes that it is only in the tourism sector that male sex work emerges so predominantly. So in closing then, this presentation sought to challenge the current orthodoxy of the global political economy by linking its many facets and the ways in which they all facilitate and reinforce each other. In particular, it sought to reintroduce the social, and this is a point that I probably didn't stress before, which is that in popular discourse, the social is very much marginalized. And as a result, social work programs, sociology programs in general are being weakened in many places, many countries. Many universities are closing down sociology programs. And the social is not part of the general discussion. But also, when people speak of the fallout of economic liberalism, they usually focus on the impact on business and trade. And what I want to argue is that there's a tremendous social and gendered impact that is also important. Now, there are many parallels with the earlier 20th century and the changes that came out of that. And I think the lessons of this have been lost. And we are once again seeing the rise of fascisms globally as those impacted seek out strong leaders who they think will protect them from others, perceived to threaten their livelihoods or way of life. These could be other ethnic groups, migrant groups, or any others. So the question I leave you with today is, where do we go from here? Welcome to paradise. Thank you. I just want to go to the yeah. All right. Okay, thank you.
You can sit here.
Yeah.
And then I want to invite Dr. Paula Tortu. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you very much. I say hi to everyone, to the Lewis family and all the friends who are here. I heard David say we need to do more challenges than agreeing, but let me tell you something.
Cheerleader.
But let me tell you, I find many things I agree with you with the things you've said. Certainly, we don't have any paradise. because not only of poverty, unemployment, the violence, I'll get back to that, but certainly if we are in a paradise, there is no reason to migrate, and migration is so heavy, out-migration is so heavy from the Caribbean. So, I mean, I can't say anything against what you've said. Now, but indeed, there is a physical paradise around here. When we see the beach, the beautiful nature, and so forth, but this paradise doesn't seem to provide well-being for the inhabitants. It may provide some well-being for the visitors of the, because of the tourist trade. Now, let's say something. We are small island economies. That means we are open economies. So tourism does bring something which is positive, because potentially it can bring quite a bit of foreign exchange. And we cannot spit on that. But yet again, it depends on how we do it. Because we can do it in a way that whatever foreign exchange it brings also an outflow of foreign exchange because of what we serve to the tourists. So we need to know how to proceed with that. So what the neoclassical liberalism economic policy that has been criticized so much, two things. It is consistent with what we learned in microeconomics. It's not always consistent with what we learn in macroeconomics. And this is so because of excess. Free trade is not necessarily bad, but excessive free trade is bad. Tariff reduction may help, but tariff elimination doesn't help. Some privatization may help, but excessive privatization doesn't help. I will illustrate some of the things I'm saying, taking the Haiti case, because the Haiti case is an extreme case. We all need to watch and understand, and that is almost about to destroy the Haitian nation. And then from there, after all, we can talk about how do we solve that. Maybe there we can have some discussion. But the facts, ma'am, that you have showed, you know, they are facts that difficultly must be or can be denied. Let me go down to the Haiti case. The excessive neoclassical policies have been introduced at least 3 times since the late 1960s in Haiti. First time in 1970, 71, upon the death of the dictator, Papa Doc. So they tried something new with Baby Doc. Who accepted it? There are many examples. I'll take only one example, which is the use that was to be given to the barrage on the Artibonite River in the area of Mirbalais. That barrage was meant to do 2 things. both things to help develop agriculture in two different regions of the country. One, to stop water when there is too much rain, so that the more than 50 hectares of flat land in the Artibonite Valley, when there is rain, the water is retained upstream. And in period of dry, to let the water go. So it was basically a water management investment. And when we were retaining the water, some of it would let go to produce electricity so that the country could pump water to the central valley, the central highland, Plateau Central, which is known to be very often a dry place. So by having that diversification, it was hoped that if you have the Plateau Central in the Artibonite Valley producing food in the country, and that policy was adopted in 1946 by a government that lasted only 4 years. And during those 4 years, did what governments that lasted 30 years haven't done. I'm referring to the Estimé government. It happened that Madloire gave a coup to Estimé, but Madloire followed the Estimé policies. Duvalier in 1956, fighting Madloire, on the name to return to the Estimé policies, and did exactly the opposite of what Estimé was doing. And that demand that lasted. So agriculture was pretty much destroyed. The Haiti I grew in the 50s and the 60s, I lived through those things. In the 50s, food was cheap in the country. The biggest peasant base became prosperous and lost out in the 1960s. And when Baby Doc came in 1971, and they pushed that thing, that neoclassical policies on it, liberalism, the electricity produced by the barrage, I don't know how to say that, hydroelectric power, they didn't send it for agricultural development, they send it to the city. Conceived originally as a rural project, but now that it exists, the electricity goes to an urban policy because there was an opportunity to bring manufacturing based on low wages. Saying that Haiti could be the new Taiwan. I remember reading these things as a young PhD holder. I remember researching this thing. I remember having gone to read about Taiwan and seeing what was going on in Haiti was not what Taiwan did. Taiwan, before getting into manufacturing development, beefed up its agriculture. It may have gone away from sugar, but gone into food production. Because you see, if you are attracting low wage by worldwide standards, and that you are saying those low wage in manufacturing, they are still higher wage than what is being earned in the rural areas, I think you're committing a big mistake. Because you see, the cost of living on the farms is not the same thing as the cost of living in the city. That's one thing. Second thing, if people do have some monetary illusion that exists too, you don't realize the cost of living in the city is higher, you only see the monetary wage being paid, and then you move. And when you realize it, it's too late. And if the city has attracted sufficient people, like Port-au-Prince did, the Port-au-Prince I lived in when I was going to high school was a city built to hold no more than 150 to 200,000 people. The Port-au-Prince that we started to see in the 1970s attracted many more people, and today the greater Port-au-Prince is estimated to have 3 million people. So this is a disaster. That's 1970 and the rice thing. Renewed in 1986 after the fall of Jean-Claude, and renewed again in 1994 upon the return of Aristide. And I can still remember those things because we were participating in discussion with the Aristide group before his return, and many of us would say, this will not work. But the political leader he wanted to say yes to those who would agree to take him back to power. This is the truth. And the Artibonite region, despite all the investment that past government of Haiti did, I mean, the Artibonite region is where the Haitian government has made the biggest ever investment in the country, and it was working well, but because of that change social policy, we lost the better part of the country capable of producing food for everybody and perhaps export food. This is the case. And I think that illustrates, Madame, the things that you are saying. Let me take manufacturing. Now, in the case of rice, we don't produce enough of it, but it is being bought from Arkansas. And the idea was bought by Bill Clinton. Let's take the manufacturing. If you go to Haiti, you will see the presence of Dominican manufacturing products almost everywhere. Spaghetti, tomato sauce, and the like. Something less well known, and we are promoting research on that thing. Research hasn't started yet, but we have produced a a proposal in response to a request of proposal by the central bank. The deadline was November 15th, 2023. We were on time, and now we almost by April 15th, 2024. We haven't received any notice. Nobody has received notice, by the way. It's not a discrimination against our thing. We have learned from Dominican sources that there exist in the Dominican Republic over 500 manufacturing firms producing almost exclusively for the Haitian market. We have heard. And certainly we want to know whether to identify those firms, and that's the result, that's what the research is about, identify those firms. What is it they produce? Did they replace firms that did exist in Haiti at some point in time in the 70s, in the 80s, or in the 90s, but that lost out because they were infant industries, not benefiting from what, in principle, neoclassical says you must protect, because you have to give them time, time to learn. So we don't know the results yet because the research hasn't started, but we want to learn from those processes and what's going on. And we will learn a lot if we do get the money. The people in charge of the research are capable of searching out, and we'll be watching and bring them all the backing that they do need. And let's talk about tariff reduction. Tariff reduction is not always bad, but excessive tariff reduction is bad. In the case of Haiti, it was done in a criminal way. Government came, pro-business, extreme right-wing government, and they would give political power to some key people from the business world and give them almost the freedom to manage the customs office. It just happens that revenue from tariff at customs in Haiti do produce half of the income of the state. Whatever you may think, if it's too high or too much, there's something different. But if that's the thing you have today, and then you give the customs office to be under the power of people who would be paying those tariffs, you know what's going to happen. And then you will know also, if you cut down government revenue by 50%, and you are in an open economy, you know what's going to be next to the price of your currency. So between 2016 and 2020, 21, 22, let's say 22, the Asian good, which in 2015 was about 47 good for $1 in 2022 went to 157 good for $1. That push up the cost of living, that destroys the middle class, that destroys any group whose revenue are not based in dollar. The political power did that. And when we know that the justice system has never worked, because in Haiti what you have also is that the economic system that was adopted since independence left out 80% of the people. Living on the high hills, paying tax, by the way, because if they were producing coffee, Haiti had a tax on coffee export. I had only 15 minutes, so I don't go. Yeah, because it's time now to get to the gang thing. The gangs initially were created by government power, starting with Jean-Bertrand Aristide. If you didn't know it, I'm telling to you. Why? To control the politics in the poor areas of Port-au-Prince where he was very popular, so that the young people for him would prevent other political groups of penetrating the poor areas. But as you know, at some point, coup d'etat or not coup d'etat, I will not discuss that, because there are arguments on favor of both things. Aristide left, and guess what? The right-wing government coming in 5 years after, not immediately after. Aristide had bought those guys with government money. Now the right-wing government has the money. Instead of going and fight, why fight? I can buy them back. And I can increase what I give, not only in money, but in gun power. Any part of the police realize that? Let's join them. So that's the division of the police between good cops and bad cops. And then the private sector. Its inventory is not at home, it's in the business sector. So the business sector is exposed. So maybe we can pay some of those bad cops also to give us protection. And above all, after some time, the gangs realize they can get financial autonomy. They can start charging directly and buy their own guns. And since the entire Caribbean is receiving drugs from South America en route to North America and Europe, the gangs got into it too. When they could transport the drugs in police cars. Now, the drug traders seems to have some preference, how much, I do not know. Those things need to do some research. It's very difficult to do this type of research. They have some preference for Haiti because of the very long coast in southern Haiti, facing the northern part of South America, at only more or less 500 miles away. So a small plane may take an hour and a half to get there. And according to the UN report, there are at least 12 pistes d'atterrissage. How you say that? David, help me out. Landing strips were, in the hands of people well connected. And those planes do land there, and there are police cars waiting to get the stuff to take where? Haiti doesn't have the income to buy drugs. The drug has to be sent to high-income countries in North America and Europe. But there is somewhere on the island where the number of planes and the number of boats and vessels are greater than the number in Haiti because of the importance of the tourist trade and the greater economic development taking place on the eastern part of the island. So those things must be transported across the border where there are only 5 posts of control, and anywhere else you can walk through. So the gangs in Haiti are also related to the gangs in the Dominican Republic. Now, if I can believe some Dominican sources, they say, Paul, it's more than that, sir. Tell me. Well, some people of the Dominican gangs are part of the gangs in Haiti. Others would say more than that. The gangs in the Dominican Republic helped creating the gangs in Haiti. If it's true or not, I cannot advance it, but I'm telling you what Dominican sources tell me. So this is the situation that is destroying the country. So it is criminal business and criminal politics at the same time. So all I have to say is that I complicate the matter a little bit of what Ma'am said, but it is the same thing. In terms of violence has always been part of Haiti. Though, just think of the Totomakut. Just think of what is less well known, the violence in the countryside where the state has not penetrated and 80% of the people live there once upon a time, not anymore, but 40% still live there. And who controls? There must be some type of rural mafia controlling it. Maybe in the hands of some social power, be it from religion, from wealth, or whatever it is. Those people do whatever they want. The justice system is not working. Women. When I was growing up, I used to learn that women are well respected in Haiti. At least that's what we were told. The women from the rural area were the ones that had the purse, because those were the ones that went to the market. The men was working on the field, and the women taking the thing to the market. That was what we were told. But that doesn't explain that they did not, that doesn't mean that they did not suffer in the hands of the men for other things. But today, openly, the gangs are violating women in a very brutal way and public way. They even take videos and put it on Facebook. You must have seen them. So there is a big crisis for Haitian women today. I didn't say anything about Puerto Rico, but those are the same things happening in Puerto Rico. To a lesser extent, but those are the same things. I mean, there are gangs in this country. Yes. And there is violence, increasing level of violence against women here. Nobody can deny that. So it is the same thing. The drugs are here too. But anyhow, let me stop. May I again thank you all for the invitation. Thank what I've heard from the main speaker. I think she has touched an aspect of the problems of Caribbean life, very important today, and the type of thinking she has brought is very useful for us to go about understanding our problems. Then we can discuss and argue about solutions. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Reddock, for her presentation, and thank you to Dr. Professor Paul Latortu for the commentary. Many years ago, Eric Wolf, who started his career in the 1940s here in Puerto Rico in the Caribbean, encouraged us to look for connections, and I think these two presentations have certainly made many connections. And to quote from Antonio Benitez Rojo, the great Caribbean scholar, there seems to be many repeating islands as well, if we're going to think about it. And maybe there is, to use the metaphor of the machine that he used in his renowned book, maybe there's another kind of machine, or maybe there is a different version of the machine. So I think with those two thinkers in mind, I think I will open it to questions and comments from the public. There's a microphone in the back, so you just raise your hand, and we'll take your question in English or Spanish, whatever you feel more comfortable with. David.
Thank you. Thank you both very much. I'm just curious, Rhoda particularly, but Paul, I guess you want to comment as well, but really everything we're talking about is about the illicit movement of things and services throughout the Caribbean. whether it be entertainment industry, tourism, whether it be entertainment products, narcotics, whether it be violence through the means of illicit movement of weapons because of market demands and so on. And of course with people, everything from what was originally labor, and we had systems of regulated labor movement, which then obviously because of demands in different markets became open, and mechanisms are found to move because there's supply and demand. And yes, maybe some people think that it's nicer to live somewhere else, but at the end of the day, there's an opportunity. I'm wondering if you want to comment on anything, because now we're also seeing a sort of backward push on things with regards to what was illicit or legalized to normalize, and then of course saying, well, maybe we shouldn't be pushing in that direction. So now we've got contradictions taking place from cases in Europe and North America of decriminalization or legalization, depending on how we like to frame it. And in the Caribbean, that's a big discussion right now. And the concern of what are the implications with regards to violence and social crisis. And your last question, well, where do we go from here? That seems to be one of the big things that governments have to deal with, because they're incapable of managing this tsunami, a lot of which is illicit, but a lot of which is also legal. So I'm wondering, any thoughts on that?
Do you want to collect?
Yeah, let's take a few questions. There's a mic here. Let's take a few questions, and then we can get the speakers to answer. Anyone else?
Yeah, the question of how we move from here, because I realize that Puerto Rico have a cooperative system. We have in Trinidad, there's a strong cooperative, but fledgling, credit union. I don't know about it in Haiti, I've been following people on Instagram who have been reorganizing around agriculture. So you're seeing this people's movement, something happening. Even within the United States, where there's a large, from a state, local government level, where cooperatives and worker-owned things are being given support from a state level. So you're seeing these investments, not too sure about Central America and all that. And I think in the projects we have been doing is trying to elaborate the idea of how do we create more cooperative system within and we have it naturally through the GAIAPs and grassroots cultural movements to build homes and organize communities, which again has been, but all these social action things which the state support is party political patronage, like a CPEP programs. We have these kind of state organized on both sides of the party. We have the PNM and the UNC, and they support these kind of grassroots organizations to hand out money to organizations, and they see that as that way. But we do see something. So I would like to hear from the both of you all, how we all see this, where we go from here, I think from sustaining people. And it will be interesting to hear from the university, what the universities are doing to come back and reorganize their curricula to get the students to be more active in their development. Okay.
Any other questions? Or no? Shall we open for answers, response from Dr. Reddock and Dr. Lottertu? There's a mic in the table. Yeah.
Thank you very much for those questions. In relation to the first one from David, I think that what I was trying to say is that basically there are all these, as you say, these illicit things are happening, and some of them are organized from above. But I think the main point I was saying is that because our social infrastructure has been hollowed out, we don't have any response. We are unable to respond to these things, and therefore we are kind of left, we are kind of fighting what you call a rare, and because as it is, as you said, the state doesn't really have an understanding of the social. And that is what I'm saying. The state understands to some extent the economic, but they don't understand the social, and it is not seen as a legitimate expenditure or legitimate investment in the social. And therefore we have marginalized populations, people who didn't finish school, but there's no social system to, for example, to get them to complete education. Like in Britain, you used to have these job centers. Every community, those job centers have now gone. All the social supports that can help people who have fallen out through the cracks to get back on there, all those things are broken down. So people are basically left on their own, and therefore they are open to all of these. In fact, the illicit become the ways of survival, and that is something that's very detrimental. So that, to me, is the concern, the absence of support for people, and people figuring it out in a climate that is actually very dangerous at the current time. Now, now the other part of this, which I didn't deal with because I actually had to leave out a lot, but it has to do with the ethics or absence of ethics of the era. There's an ethics of success, and and success is basically wealth and conspicuous evidence of this. So that a lot of the morality of things being good in and of themselves, or things being wrong because they harm others, those basic ethics are irrelevant, especially if they get in the way of success. So I think that it's not just it's not only economic and social, but there's also philosophical underlying philosophy that is also guiding the ethos of the time. In relation to the other question is that there is resistance to it, and there are grassroots initiatives of various types emerging in different parts of the region. Many of them separate, independent, and not really knowing of each other or forming kind of networks to strengthen each other. So I think it's important for us to acknowledge, study, understand, strengthen these alternatives that are happening. Some of them are older alternatives. For example, the cooperative movement here in Puerto Rico is established, and I think it's excellent. And it's a pity, I don't know if it's linked up with the cooperative movement in the English-speaking Caribbean as well, which is also historical, but which is also, in a way, it's very strong, but also losing its philosophical moorings. And so those are kinds of alternative actions that could happen, and also alternative economics. Going back to, let's say, local production. Eating our own food is a revolutionary act, and that's something I really love here in Puerto Rico, because certainly in my country, it's disappearing. I think we probably have more franchises per capita in the region than anywhere else, and the franchises have not adapted to our cuisine. So, but also we need to have young people with cultural confidence, to really believe in ourselves and what we can do and what we are able to do. And I think that also we have lost. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let me say a few things about all the different aspects. Somebody asked, what about the service? No, that was David, the services. When we're talking about the government services, government in Haiti has a very low productivity. People are employed for political reasons. The main thing you must know what to do is how to sign your check at the end of the month. And and some political leaders do say that. They offer you a job, and then the person says, "Can I do that?" And the guy will say, "Can you sign that check? If you can sign that check, you can do the job." This is the kind of now. Once there are other private sector services that have bettered their output in Haiti. Telecommunication has bettered its output in Haiti. That doesn't prevent it to get into financial trouble for the following reason. Digicel, as some of you know also, I think they are doing a decent job with some social responsibility. They have built over 200 schools, deep in the countryside. I mean, no other enterprise has ever done that in Haiti. Even the state hasn't done that over a very short period of time. The school I am directing, the MBA program, which did not exist in Haiti, we are located on the 6th floor of the Digicel building, and we're paying a price below market price. And that's because we're in education. But Digicel has financial trouble because in Haiti, it earns its income in local currency, but it was financed on the international market, so it must pay in dollar. So when the good passed from 47 good to $1 to 157, that puts a big pressure on Digicel. And services, I don't know, David, I don't know if that's what you had in mind, but those Haitian migrants in Florida are buying guns to sell in Haiti at 5-6 times the price bought in Florida. And this is putting money and guns in the hands of the gangs, and the gangs they raise money to extortions to buy those things. And there is a big market of second-hand clothes in Haiti. Yes. They come in big, and the system, the control system in the US seems to have some difficulty to deal with control and verify those things, and they put guns inside those things and send, and they go through until months after they are discovering how it happened. A cooperative movement in Haiti, it's being reborn because it had died away 20 years ago because the government stole its money. By encouraging them to offer very high interest rates. I mean, you are offering something 90% interest rates a year to attract people, many people from the diaspora investing, and that was the Aristide government did that. And nothing against Aristide. 20 years ago, I was defending Aristide in here. So I'm not, but I must realize what they did with power. But it's being reborn now. The cooperative systems are under some control of the central bank. I think that is good in a way. But let's be careful. Even some of the good things the central bank can do in terms of policing, there are things that they do I don't understand. I cannot understand how come a central bank fixes reserve requirement on deposits at 50%. And we're like, why? This is to control inflation. I said, what? This is the way you control inflation? And the banks don't complain. You know what? Because the central bank pays interest to the bank. So it is guaranteed income from those who print the money. So that's going to increase interest rates to everybody in the economy. And I said, why is that happening? Well, maybe we need to do some more research. I have an hypothesis. I think it is to finance the government. Because there is no financial market organized. If the government needs money, it cannot issue bonds in local currency. Nobody's going to buy it because nobody trusts the government to pay back on time. You see, so the banking system, the commercial banks are doing well, but does not mean the services, the financial services to the general community is doing well. So there are a lot of reform to be made, and that's not easy to do. And finally, somebody is asking about the universities. The university system, from the public university system, barely receives half of 1% of state budget. Half of 1% of state budget. In this place, UPR used to receive once upon a time 10% of Puerto Rican budget. Now it's not 10%, it's 7%. But half of 1%, can they do job with it? No, they can't. So a government that's not willing to put its money in the education system in general, and specifically, well, sometimes primary school must come first, that's true. But you get to a point where you need the university because those are the people who produce the doctors, the engineers. Without the doctors, you cannot do health. Without the engineers, you cannot build infrastructure. If that's what you do, that means you don't have any intention of having a development policy. This is it. And this is what must be changed. For many, many, many years, left of center political parties, between, entre guillemets, quotation mark, they refuse to talk economics. And I said, but if you're talking politics only, what are you going to be doing if you get to power? This is true until today. It's only very recently, under the pressure of some private economists, people have started to talk about economics. And last weekend, I had the opportunity to participate in Miami to the very first economic gathering of the diaspora, but with leaders from Haiti, non-political leaders, to talk about, we have a political crisis. Have you ever thought about what's next after the crisis? We must talk economics. And then we are discovering so many members of the diaspora doing good work in Miami, in New York. Haiti needs. And they are willing. And I think this movement will keep on moving. Let's see how far it goes. One thing I say, the country has been badly managed for more than 200 years, with exceptions. I don't want to be too hopeful, but if the Haitians get some better management and better communication from whoever leaders they may have, I think this country can surprise us. Because I see there is willingness to work, there is willingness to learn, and I'll finish on this word. Many of the workers working in growing sectors in the Dominican Republic are Haitians. In agriculture, in tourism, in infrastructure. Will these people come back to Haiti? Under what conditions? I do not know. Could we build more people to replace them? I believe the answer is yes, but how to go about creating la confianza, the trust, because the legal situation and the way we've been brought up, what we've learned in life, give a lot of mistrust between us and among us and within families. Those are big, big sociological issues. I must remain hopeful, because if you lose hope, then there is nothing else. But I think it's possible. But it is damn difficult, and it's going to take a very, very long time. Thank you.
I think we have reached our time limit. I don't know if there's any more question, but I feel like ending in a country that can surprise us is a good note to end. And also the very relevant questions on ethics and morals that Professor Reddock has raised in her commentary. So thanks again for coming to this 8th lecture. We hope to see you next year in the 9th Lewis lecture, for which we probably will have very good surprises. Thank you very much. And thanks, professors.